In the around half a month of me doing these poetry analysis videos of Tang Dynasty poems, you might have recognized that there are a lot of poems on the themes of tragedy, longing, sorrow, and subjects of this more negative nature of things. Of course, this is not what the majority of Tang Dynasty poems are, and maybe I will talk about some of the more optimistic ones in the near future. But these are the most famous ones from the canon. Today, we'll proceed with another, the Painting of Jinling by poet Wei Zhuang, who speaks on the sadness of watching your society and nation collapse as it did during the end of the Tang Dynasty, and also some commentary on the nature of art itself. First, let us listen to the Chinese version. 精灵图，韦庄。谁为伤心画不成？画人心竹世人情。君看六幅南朝事，老木寒云满孤城。Here's my English version. Painting of Jinling by Wei Zhuang. Who says sorrow cannot be painted, just as painters follow the moons of the world? Watch these 6 scrolls of thousand court scenes, of aged trees, cold clouds, and the old capital. First, let us talk about the poet Wei Zhuang a little bit, as he is not nearly as well known as most of the Tang Dynasty poets we had talked about so far. He was an important literary figure in the late Tang Dynasty, and later, after the collapse of Tang, served as the chancellor of the former Shu during the beginning of the Five Dynasties period. His long narrative poem, The Lament of a Qing Woman, Qing Fu Ying, very vividly portrays the misfortunes of women during wartime and gained considerable fame in its time, and is often considered alongside The Peacock Flies Southeast, 孔雀东南飞, and Ballad of Mulan, Mulan Shi, as one of the 3 masterpieces of Yuefu poetry. This poem, Painting of Jinling, is effectively both a meditation on art and a lamentation for the death or decline of the Tang era. It was written by the author after viewing 6 painted scrolls depicting historical events from the 6 dynasties period, which generally refers to the 6,000 dynasties in Chinese history from the 3 kingdoms period to the northern and southern dynasties period, another incredibly chaotic and bloody period in Chinese history prior to the Tang Dynasty. Like always, a lot of these 4-line Tang poems are usually divided into 2 couplets. The poet began the first couplet with a rhetorical challenge, 谁为伤心画不成? Who says sorrow cannot be painted? It is an interesting question in of itself, which is that if an emotion like sorrow can truly and properly be conveyed or expressed through mere artwork. One might say that art can translate the feeling of oneself to another, but is what the artwork representing really the same as what the artist felt at that time? It is difficult to say. It does need to be said that this question isn't necessarily out of nowhere when used as the first line of the poem, as a lot of scholars believe that this opening line is in fact a response to the poet Gao Chan, a poet slightly earlier than Wei Zhuang himself, in his famous poem Evening View of Jinling, Jinling Wan Wang. Here is that poem. Jinling Wan Wang, Gao Chan. 承伴浮云归晚翠，犹陪落日泛秋声。世间无限丹青手，一片伤心画不成。 Or, in my English translation, Evening View of Jinling, Gao Chan. Once I watched clouds drift into dusk-bound hills, the city bathed in the voice of autumn following the sun. So many hands can master both brush and ink, but not one can paint this ache of my heart. The final 2 lines of that poem, so many hands can master both brush and ink, but not one can paint this ache in my heart, are the subject in which Wei Zhuang is responding to. Gao Chan foresaw that the Tang Dynasty was beset with crises on all sides, and was irreversibly heading toward total collapse, which the agony and sorrow of this condition, in his view, was something that ordinary painters were simply incapable of expressing through art. It isn't difficult to see how Painting of Jinling would be a response to the Evening View of Jinling, both in the theme, topic, but also substance. The poem by Gao Chan uses the scenery of Jinling to express his sorrow, and describe how it cannot be translated through paintings and art. In my opinion, this is more of a statement of passion rather than a statement of fact, as the poet was pretty much trying to say the equivalent of no one can understand my sorrow. But clearly, Wei Zhuang took it seriously, or at least thought it was evocative enough of an idea to respond to, with that first line, who says sorrow cannot be painted? It is also expressed very cleverly through the title itself, with painting of Jinling as a response to evening view of Jinling, directly using the painting of the scenery which Gao Chan said could not be replicated as the basis of his own claim that emotions like sorrow could be shared through art and painting. Why can't the heartbreak of society be painted? It is because most painters only seek to cater to the shallow taste of the public, preferring to depict embellished images of peace and prosperity rather than reflecting on the true face of the society around them, which is expressed through that second line, 画人心逐，世人情. Just that painters follow the moods of the world. 逐 meaning to chase, to pursue, and effectively suggests that the hearts of painters are not of their own, and rather align with 世人情. 世人 means ordinary people or common people, and 情 means feeling, sentiment, emotion. Effectively, the wills of the broader public, or the broader society. If the collective feeling of the era leaned toward pleasure, nostalgia, or idealism, then sorrow is excluded from representation, not because it is unworthy or unpaintable, but because it is unwelcomed socially. The poet is not just speaking about painting here in the most literal sense, but rather a broader commentary on the subject of representation. Who gets to tell the story at any given time, and what parts of the story are left untold because they do not align with fashionable sentiment. It is a general commentary on censorship, complicity, and the distortion of historical memory, which I'm sure everyone have their own examples in the modern world. For Wei Zhuang, this is of course a more zoomed-in observation of the late Tang society specifically, which he views as trying to conceal the real problems and issues by painting a false image of peace and prosperity rather than depicting reality of the desolation and decline of the society of the time, creating a pushback against the whitewashing piece and ignoring historical truths of both the past and the present. The second couplet leads us into the actual painting itself, which is the literal subject of the poem. 君看六幅南朝事，老木寒云满孤城. Watch the 6 rows of southern court scenes of aged trees, cold clouds, and the old capital. The word 君 at the time is a more literary or honorary way of saying you or your, and by addressing us the reader in this manner, the poet here tries to put us into the position of the viewer, and to quote-unquote see the painting with him. We as the readers of the poem cannot actually see the painting, as the identity of the painter had seemed to have been lost to time, alongside with the painting itself. What we do know is the subject in which he painted, which were 6 scenes from the 6 dynasties of the southern court, the Nanchao period we spoke of at the beginning, all of which had established their capitals in the city of Jinling, hence the name of the work. They were seen by later scholars as decadent, fragile, and ultimately doomed, which reflects the poet's own view on the state of Tang at the time. In the paintings, the unnamed artist chose not to depict images of triumphant kings or flourishing courts, or dancers, or scholars, or festivals. Instead, they chose to show 老木, old trees, 寒云, cold clouds, and 孤城, the lonely city. I spoke of the character Han previously in my River Snow video, which is used to describe coldness, but also carries meanings of desolation, misery, or withering, and have this distinctively negative connotation associated with the word. The 3 objects themselves are also, in my view, highly symbolic. The old trees depicts the passing of time, and specifically aging, giving the images of a decayed or ruined field temporally and naturally. The cold clouds is the reflection of this emotional coldness which I just explained, and the old capital is symbolic of the falling apart of the city, which is in turn an allegory for the government of the time of the artist, and now the Tang court for the poet, touching on the decay and chilling emotions and atmosphere of nature, the individual, and the society with these 3 symbols. Taken together, this final couplet transforms the 6 rows from historical illustrations into metaphysical meditations on the current climate of the Tang court. They do not show the glamour of emperors or glories of battle, but the aftermath of them, the traces of what was once human civilization now taken by time and indifference. These scrolls, paintings, do paint sorrow, but not in the way society prefers. They are quiet, architectural, and elemental. This goes back to a familiar concept that I spoke of a lot on this channel already, the idea of 意境, to make the reader feel the emotions of the poets by using sceneries and particular images to evoke the feelings rather than being told to about how the poets were thinking in words. This poem, Painting of Jinling, effectively constructs a space where the reader doesn't encounter grief directly, but experiences it through absence, through trees that no longer bear fruit, through clouds that shroud the heavens, through a capital no longer occupied. It is a grief that is not cried aloud, but left hanging in the air to resonate in silence. The genius of the poem, I think, lies in the, I suppose, contrast between its critique of the societal reluctance to portray pain and the immediate example of how one could portray pain, if we choose to look with honest eyes. Both the artist and the two poets are lamenting not only the fall of Jinling, but the aesthetic choices of a society that refuses to record what it has lost. The art becomes complicit in erasure, and the painter becomes a servant to taste, rather than truth. Yet, the truth is preserved. In just 4 lines, Wei Zhuang gave us a complete emotional and historical arc and analysis of the painting. The suppression of sorrow, its justification, the confrontation with history, and the quiet vindication of grief as a valid, paintable subject. It is quite structurally impeccable and emotionally precise. In the broader context of late Tang literature, painting of Jinling is emblematic of the late imperial disillusionment, a growing awareness that the Tang Golden Age had long passed, and that all attempts to recreate its memory would be haunted by the echoes of collapse. Much like Du Fu's Spring View or Liu Songyuan's River Snow, this poem is about the ghost of empire, how it haunts the landscape, the language, and even the arts. But unlike those previous poems, Wei Zhuang goes one step further in indicting the cultural mechanisms of avoidance, the painters who turn away from pain, the audiences who accept it. And I want to say very quickly before we wrap up here, that although these two poems on the surface seem to disagree with whether sorrow can be painted, the reality is that both of the poets are expressing the same concern over the fate of the late Tang and the fate of the people and art as a whole. Thank you so much for watching. I have a literature Discord I made if you all want to discuss literature with me, and also a classical music Discord server if you're interested. I'm C, and once again, thank you for watching.